Hello, my name is Bethany, and today I want to discuss why I believe the study of Western civilization is important. Like most of you, throughout the course of the reading, I was actually kind of surprised to see that there was no definitive definition, or that they could find a definitive definition of what and where exactly Western civilization started, which I find really interesting because when I was in high school, it seemed like Western Civ was a study of, things that made America America, things that made Europe Europe, things that made different countries who they were. And the fact that no one can pinpoint exactly what it is was rather surprising, but it still doesn't negate the fact that I believe studying it is rather important. One of the readings that we did, called There Is No Such Thing as Western Civilization by Kwame Anthony Appiah, said that it is at best the source of a great deal of confusion, at worst an obstacle to facing some of the great political changes of our time. I get where he's coming with this. It seems that those who disagree with Western civilization or the study of it really disagree because they find it racist and sexist and all the ists that you can put in there. But the fact doesn't change that it's part of who made us who we are. We can not study it, but not studying it doesn't mean things didn't happen. I'd rather know about the things that happened so we don't repeat it than to pretend they didn't happen and stumble into it in the future. Another one of the readings that we had was Who Put the West in Western Civilization by Robert Royal. And I like what he said in this because we forget that every culture and every civilization has their downside. It doesn't make the people of that culture or civilization any less people. It just means that they had dark moments. And Robert Royal mentions some of those dark moments in other civilizations. He says, history enables us to make intelligent comparisons. We may thus find, say, male-female income disparities among us, but before we indulge ourselves in the outrage against the very source of our liberties, we should compare them with the African female mutilations, the Chinese foot binding, the Indian widows and sati, which I had to look up what that meant, but it was committing suicide either on their own or being forced to when their husband just died. I did not know that. And then he continues on to say the general repression of women in Islam and a host of other practices that we never would tolerate in the West. So people forget this part of the world exists because they're so focused on where they came from and how bad it was where they came from that they forget that other places have their issues as well. Just because it's not studied doesn't mean it'll go away. One of the things that I find really important about Western civilization is it does, whether good or bad, gives us a place, a home, a belonging to a certain culture, whether we hate that beginning or whether we love to study that beginning. It doesn't matter, but it gives us an identity, and having an identity is really important. Whether you hate it or you love it, you know where you came from. One of the articles I had stumbled onto when I was studying this was written in 1941 by Walter Lippmann, and the article was called The Study of Western Civilization. It was called Education versus Western Civilization. And he stated that during the past 40 or 50 years, now remember this was written in 1941, he said that during the past 40 or 50 years, those who are responsible for education have progressively removed from the curriculum of studies Western culture, which produces the modern democratic state. The schools and colleges have therefore been sending out into the world men who no longer understand the creative principles of society in which they must live. I thought this was really interesting because even in the 1940s and 50 years before that, he's saying that it was being Western civilization was being removed, and the men that they're being sent out is not going to understand the society that they have to live in because it's not being studied. I thought that was really, really interesting point to make, because you have to live in a world where you don't understand where some of the rules came from or some of the adjustments came from. How can you be a lawmaker if you don't study Western culture and know where these laws came from? Or how can you be a politician without understanding what you're fighting for and the reason behind what you're fighting for? And Walter Lippmann was making a good point. They're sending out uneducated people into a world that they have to kind of figure out as they go along, instead of just teaching them at the beginning. Whether, like I said, you hate it or you love it, it's got to be studied. And the last article I want to read is an article called Western Civilization, Inequality and the Diversity Shell Game by J. Scott Kenny. He mentions this. Effectively, the current trend away from having broad-based intellectual found in the Western canon, when he's basically saying when they shy away from the broad-based intellectual found in the Western canon, it creates two issues. First is it causes confused students foundation understanding of the world around them, rendering them intellectually homeless and relatively unprepared for advanced study. Basically, it's saying that they don't know what's going on in the world because they don't have a foundation or a home to build off of. And then two, it truncates into a narrow ideological set of foundational assumptions that fosters a sense of grievance rather than curiosity. The wonder found in having a deeper well from which to draw, more flavors to taste than the bitterness of grievance. He's saying that instead of having a better place to draw from history and the wonder of where things came from, the fact that we're not letting these people have this, all they can taste is the bitterness of it instead of the wonder. And I thought that was rather interesting statement to make, because once again, I'm going to say it, whether you hate it or you love it, it needs to be studied, because it's going to give you a greater information to draw from, because it gives you a home to stand in. Whenever you get lost in what's happening, you know, based on the study of Western civilization, where you stand. Once again, based on whether you hate it or you love it, at least you have footing.